Hello students and welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Shafali Nagpal from Bhagat Phul Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya. Today we are going to talk on the module International Trade Theories Part 1 under the paper International Business Operations. After reading this module, you will be able to understand what fosters the international trade, know the classical theories of international trade. Since time immemorial, goods have been moved across the nations and people have made profit by selling the product to the other countries, which were not available there. As per the principles of the classical economics, there are four basic factors or resources of production. Land, like land, trees, minerals. Second is labor, the mental and the physical skills of the individuals. Third is capital, such as tools, machines, factories used in the production or to facilitate the production. Fourth is the entrepreneurship, the availability of the natural resources, labor, and capital is not sufficient to ensure the economic success. These factors of production have to be combined and organized by the enterprising people who see the opportunities for making the profit and who are willingly to take the risk by producing the goods and services in the expectation that they will be sold. However, for the success of a business, it is not just a matter of what resources we have, but also how well we use them. Since the time of Adam Smith, people have been pondering on what underlines the movement of goods and services across the nations, giving rise to the theories of the international trade. As the time changed, the nature of the economic activities also underwent a change, and accordingly, the way to look at underlying factors, they also went under change. Repeat, they also underwent a change. Several economists proposed different theories of international trade at different times. In this module, we shall study the various theories of international trade. Bird in the ancient times. According to the principles of mercantilist theory, a country's goal should be to enlarge those holdings, that is, the asset in the form of gold and silver. In order to increase the gold in the country, it was believed that money should come into the country and not go out of it. Therefore, mercantilism suggests that the ruling government should advance these goals by playing a protectionist role in the economy, by encouraging exports and discouraging imports, notably through the use of subsidies, tariffs, respectively. The theory dominated Western European economic policies from the 16th to the late 18th century. This was a time of colonialism, and the nations concentrated on capturing the colonies, exploiting them to purchase the raw material and sell the finished goods. There was no move to sell the goods between the nations. Colonialism used the concept of mercantilism to achieve a favorable trade balance based on the economy of colonies is always secondary to the economy of the mother country. Second, the colonies should provide cheap raw materials to the mother country and markets for the manufactured goods of the mother country. Third, in return, the mother country provides military security and political administration to the colonies. And fourth, the overriding goal is national monopoly, meaning that the nation's colonies should be restricted to trading only with each other or within the mother country. The various assumptions of mercantilism theory adopted were: the theory assumes that wealth and monetary assets are identical. Mercantilism suggests that the ruling government should advance these goals by playing a protectionist role in the economy by encouraging exports and discouraging imports, notably through the use of tariffs and subsidies. The theory dominated Western European economic policies from the 16th to the late 18th century, as discussed above. Mercantilism theory is based on the following assumptions during during colonialism. First, there is a finite amount of wealth in the world. Second, a nation can only grow rich at the expense of other nations. Third, therefore, a nation should try to achieve and maintain a favorable trade balance, exporting more than its imports. At the same time, the mercantilism theory faced certain problems. These are: first, the economies of the colonies and the mother country never mesh perfectly. Second, mercantilism is expensive to implement because it requires complex navigation laws that are difficult to enforce. Third, mercantilism tends to dampen free enterprises and individual initiatives. Fourth, economic regulations tend to result in illegal activity or smuggling. Considering the prevailing socio-economic conditions of those times, mercantilism might have been a useful line of thought, but it has several shortcomings. Its major limitation is that it confuses the acquisition of treasure with the acquisition of wealth. Assets in the modern times do not exist, only in the form of gold and silver. In the present times, there are newer forms of assets. Moreover, protectionist policy weakens the country because it robs individuals of the ability to trade freely and to benefit from voluntary exchanges. Moreover, it forces a countries to produce products it would otherwise not in order to minimize imports. The theory of mercantilism was questioned by the economists like Adam Smith and later by Ricardo by giving due importance to the individuals and stressing that their welfare was the welfare for the nation. They believed in free trade, supported liberalism and enlightenment, and treated the wealth of nation in terms of the sum of enjoyments of the individuals in society and not merely in terms of gold and silver. Therefore, any activity which would increase the consumption of the people was to be considered with favor. Accordingly, their trade theories proposed by them were based upon the principles of free trade and the specialization in the production of those goods where resources were most suitable. Let us now study the theory of absolute advantage. The theory of absolute advantage, it was proposed by Adam Smith, who argued that mercantilism robs individuals of the ability to trade freely and to benefit from the voluntary exchanges. According to this theory of absolute advantage, a country should export those goods and services for which it is more productive than the other countries and import those goods and services for which other countries are more productive than its own. A country is said to possess an absolute advantage over its trading partner when it can produce more of an output with a given amount of inputs. This can be understood with the help of an example. Suppose that we are studying two countries, England and Portugal, who are producing wine and cloth. We further assume that there is no trade between the two countries and the output of the two countries per unit of the output is shown in the following table. Given below, table 1 shows the output per units of the input of both the countries. For example, the output of the wine per unit of the input by the England is 1, and output of the wine per unit of the input by Portugal is 6, and output of the cloth by England for per unit of input is 12, and similarly for the Portugal is 10. When there is no trade between the two countries, both produce the goods as per their needs. We further assume that each country has 1000 units of input and uses the resources equally to produce the two goods. When they are consuming their output alone, we multiply our 2 by 2 matrix of outputs by 500. That is, half of the 1000 units of inputs for each country in the production of each product. We find that the output per unit of input production of wine and cloth for England for 500 is 6000, where the total output is 1 and 12. For the Portugal is 6 and 10, and for the 500 input units is the total production is 5000. This we can understand with the help of the following table. In the table 2 below shows the two countries, England and the Portugal, which is producing wine and cloth. They are producing 1 unit of wine and 12 units of clothes, whereas the Portugal is producing 6 units of wine and 10 units of cloth with the input of 500 factors. The production of the wine is 500 and the cloth is 6000. If we multiply 500 with 1 unit of wine and 500 with 12 units of clothes. So the total production of the wine comes out to be 500 for England and 6000 for cloth. Similarly, for the Portugal, for 6 units of wine output, the total production of the wine is 3000 and the total production of the cloth is 10 multiplied by 500, it is 5000. In this scenario, the total production of the wine is 3500 units and the clothes is 11,000 units. Both the country consumes what they produce. In next scenario, we assume that each country specializes in the production of that product for which it has an absolute advantage. In this example, England has an absolute advantage in cloth and Portugal has absolute advantage in wine. The two countries produces only one product, that is, England produces only cloth and Portugal produces only wine. Both allocate their full resources to only produce one product. Assuming that they allocate 1000 units, England will produce 12,000 units of cloth and Portugal will produce 6000 units of wine. The total output of the two countries increases by 2500 additional units of wine and 1000 additional units of cloth. Hence, with the same product, foreign trade between the two countries increase the output. After trade, the international exchange ratio would lie somewhere between the pre-trade exchange ratio of the two countries. In other words, the additional output produced because of the trade will be distributed according to the terms of trade between the two countries. For this purpose, the domestic scenario of the two countries has to be studied. In England, 1 unit of wine is equivalent to 12 units of cloth and 1 unit of cloth is equivalent to 1 by 12 barrels of wine. Similarly, in the case of Portugal, 1 unit of wine is equal to 1 or 2 by 3 units of cloth and 1 unit of cloth is equivalent to 3 by 5 unit of wine. Hence, the additional output will be taken by the two countries and both would benefit from trade as compared to production in isolation. Students, let us now understand the theory of comparative advantage. The theory of absolute advantage provided a useful framework for international trade for centuries. but it was looked upon with a different perspective. David Ricardo, a British economist, argued that the cost advantage is not the necessary and the sufficient condition for trade between the nations. He argued that nations would be benefited from the trade even if they had the absolute cost advantage. According to Ricardo, so long as the other country is not equally less productive in all lines of production, measurable in terms of opportunity cost of each commodity in the other two countries, it will still be mutually gainful for them if they enter into trade. This theory states that the country should produce and export those goods and services for which it is relatively more productive than the other countries, and import those goods and services for which other countries are relatively more productive. A country is said to have a competitive advantage in the production of goods if it can produce at a lower opportunity cost than other countries. For example, given earlier, wine and cloth, the opportunity cost of the cloth production is defined as amount of the wine that must be given in order to produce one more unit of cloth. The Ricardian model assumed two countries producing two goods using labor as the only factor of production. Goods are assumed to be homogeneous or identical across the firms and the countries. Labor is homogeneous within a country and heterogeneous, non-identical across the countries. Goods can be transported costlessly between the countries. Labor can be allocated costlessly between industries within a country but cannot move between countries. Labor is always fully employed. Production technology differences exist among the industries and across the countries and are reflected in the labor productivity parameters. Firms are assumed to maximize the profit while consumers are assumed to maximize utility. The table number 3 explains the concept of opportunity cost with the help of the following table, where it describes the 2x2 matrix of output per unit of input for paper and fish. If the Finland is producing the paper, its output is 3, and for the fish, its output is 4. Whereas for the Germany, for the paper, it's 1, and for the fish, it's 2. In this example, we assume that two countries, Finland and Germany, produce paper and fish. If both the countries were to produce only one product, they would have forego the production of the other product. For example, if Finland decided to produce only fish, then it would forego the production of paper. Similarly, Germany decides to produce paper, it has to forego the production of fish. In these cases, foregone alternatives is lost when one option is selected. Each country has comparative advantage over its trading partners in the production of that goods for which its opportunity cost is lower than that of its trading partner. In the above example, the output per unit of input in the case of paper produced by the Finland is 3/4 of that of the fish. In case of Germany, it's half. In other words, if Finland were to produce paper by foregoing fish, it would be able to produce 3/4 of the output per unit of labor cost it would have used to produce the fish. Opportunity cost, that is, what must be given to produce the other. Output over input for paper for fish in the case of Finland is 1:1/3 for the fish and 3/4 for the paper. In case of Germany, it is 2 fish and half paper. With this background, if we assume that the input is 1000 unit of labor in each country, the output for each country would be as shown in the below table. The table 4 shows output for the 1000 unit of labor inputs in isolation. In the situation, there is no trade between the two countries. 1000 unit of labor input is equally divided between the two products, and the output paper produced by the Finland and Germany would be 1500 and 500 units respectively. Similarly, the output of the fish would be 2000 and 1000 units respectively. Therefore, the total production over consumption of the two countries would be 2000 units of paper and 3000 units of fish. Further, let us assume that two countries engage themselves into trade and produce the products in which they have a comparative cost advantage. That is, produce the product which they can do at a price lower than the other country. In this example, Finland has a comparative advantage because she is able to produce 3 units of paper with 1 unit of input, as against Germany, who produce 1 unit of paper. Similarly, Germany has a cost advantage of producing fish. Assuming that Finland allocates 70% of its inputs to producing paper and rest 30% to producing fish, Germany allocates 100% of the inputs to producing fish. The output is shown in the following table. In the table 5 below, we see that in this situation of trade, the total output of the two countries increases. Now, who would take the increased output would depend upon the terms of trade and bargaining power of the two countries, as Finland will produce 2100 paper and 1200 fish, whereas Germany will produce 2200 fish, and the total output will be 2100 for the paper and 3300 for the fish. Ricardian theory concludes that when country specializes and the relative price of the produced goods rises, income for worker also rises, and the imported goods are less expensive for the consumers. Trade has the potential to benefit both high productivity and low productivity countries. Although trade may change the distribution of income within countries, the high productivity or low wages give countries a cost advantage that allows them to produce efficiently. However, limitation of the theory is that in transportation cost and several other factors that can influence with the flow of goods across nation. Still, this theory provides a basis to encourage free trade between the nations as against the protectionist theory of the earlier times. Both the absolute advantage and comparative advantage theories fail to realize that the welfare of society does not depend upon the gains from the international trade, but depends upon the way the gains are distributed. The individual gains under the theories are not guaranteed unless the government adopts an appropriate redistribution policy. There have to be certain incentives for the producers also in order to keep them engaged in the exportable production. These theories have also been criticized on the grounds that the labor is not the only input determining the cost of production. So students, let us now summarize that we have learnt in this module. The issue of trade between the nations has been studied by the economists since long, and Adam Smith proposed that the nation would trade if there is absolute cost advantage in producing a product in one country. However, Ricardo proposed that an absolute cost advantage could not fully satisfy the trade between the two nations, and he proposed a comparative cost advantage theory. Olin thesis proposes that a country export goods which are relatively a greater proportion of its abundant and cheap factor. Thank you.